Hello and welcome to episode 48 of Off the Bandstand. My name is Christian Wiggs. I am your host. Today's episode is Tommy Hayward, a beloved guitarist whose presence on the Austin scene has been felt for the better part of 2 decades. Tommy has served as a generational bridge between jazz musicians here locally, playing with people like Ephraim Owens, Hayward, Butch Miles, Tony Campise, and Dr. James Polk, among countless others. And in 2014, Tommy joined Elias Haslanger's critically acclaimed 5-time Austin Music Award-winning ensemble, Church on Monday. In this episode, we talk about the intricacy of making music and filmmaking. We also talk about his warm invitation into a coveted residency where the audience is serious about etiquette, and a slow motion party foul that changes the phrase to "one strike, you're out." Moving on to the releases of the week, the first one that we want to plug is Tommy's debut record from 2017 called Storybook, and this is an intentional, beautiful record that was birthed not out of the need for content, but for the love and craft of composing itself. The trio that consists of Tommy on guitar, Daniel Litdu Durham on bass, and Brandon Guerra on drums really highlights just how sensitive and collaborative each one of them are when creating art together. And if you want to support this release directly, you can go to tommyhoward.com, and if you want to find this on Bandcamp and get the digital files, you can go over to destinyrecords.bandcamp.com, and for all things Tommy all the time, you can go to his Instagram handle, which is @TomTGuitar. Now moving on to the second release of the week, this is Elias Haslanger's second album under the group name Church on Monday. This is called Live from the Gallery, that released in 2014, and this is live from the Continental Club Gallery, where they have held that residency spot for the past 8 years, both before and during Tommy's time with the band. And we talk in this episode about how that spot really is kind of the treasured unicorn gig where you have it all. Incredible musicians making really meaningful music on stage, a hip spot to play music, and a dedicated audience that is really attentive and dedicated to the idea of a true listening room here in town. So if you want to support this release, you can go over to elijazz.com. You can also go over to eliashaslanger.bandcamp.com to grab those digital files on Bandcamp, which is where you can support the band the most. And then also, if you want to find everything that Elias is doing, both with Church on Monday, his individual projects, and also his sideman projects, you can find him on Instagram @Elias Haslanger Music. So now moving on to the Monk shows of the week. The first one that we want to plug is tonight, Thursday, June 17th. It is the Ron Wilkins Quintet featuring Becca Patterson, both alumnus of the show. Really amazing people and amazing musicians. Go and support them. Tune in if you can. Then tomorrow night, Friday, June 18th, is going to be Thomas Winglinski and Paulo Santos and their sextet. Thomas is in town for the summer because he lives here in the Houston, Austin area, but he is currently studying over at the University of Miami in Florida, getting his master's degree, but he has come back with some tasty arrangements to play with a really strong friendship with Paulo Santos on saxophone, and it is going to be super special. So tune in to that. And then on Sunday, Sean Michael Giddings is having his album release show with his trio. That is Sunday, June 20th. And then finally, the last one of the week that we want to plug is Marco Antonio Santos's Schofield Quartet, which is going to be on Tuesday, June 22nd at 7:30 p.m. like all of these shows. And a special note on the show for Thomas, tomorrow night, Friday, the 7:30 show is sold out, but the 9:30 show still has a few tickets, so go and grab those before those sell out as well. But if worst comes to worst, you can always stream it on Monk's Facebook page and also their YouTube page, and it's all linked on their website as well at monksjazzclub.com. So anyways, that is it for all of the releases of the week and all of the Monk shows that we want to plug. Support Storybook from Tommy Hayward and Live from the Gallery, or Live at the Gallery, from Elias Haslanger. And let's just dive into today's episode. Here is episode 48, Tommy Hayward. This is Off the Bandstand.
with kids, like it's closed captioning 24 hours a day on the TV, because when they're awake, you have to have the closed captions on because they're yelling and you can't hear the TV. And when they're asleep, you have to have the closed captions on because you don't want to wake them up. So you can't turn the TV up loud.
Yeah, sure.
The only way I can like watch a movie without closed captions is to put the headphones on. So that was like my routine. I would turn out all the lights, hook up the Blu-ray player. Shout out to Austin Public Library, by the way, because I like to watch all the special features and all that. So they have all those Blu-ray, they have that Criterion collection. I don't know if you know what that is, where it's basically like 5 hours of extra, special features of how they made it and interviews. And I watch all that stuff. I just kind of got into it. That was like my thing over the pandemic. I was basically doing like directors. So I watched, a bunch of David Lynch movies, a bunch of Stanley Kubrick movies. And then I went into directors that I had never really checked out before. I just went down the rabbit hole because it was like, I have nothing else to do,
Well, what was your favorite director that you had not looked that much into, but were like, oh man, this is definitely my vibe, 100%?
Maybe like, I don't know, who did I check out that was new? Billy Wilder, he's an older guy from the 50s. But he did like Some Like It Hot, which is Sinatra, and it's like a classic kind of movie. Yeah. He also has this movie called, what is it called? Sunset Boulevard, which is about an old silent movie actress who's like washed up and she's trying to make her comeback, and it's a really good movie from the like 50s, I think. But he's a really good director that I hadn't really checked out. Billy Wilder, Sam Peckinpah, who's like a Western guy. Okay. Did a bunch of Westerns, and I checked out a bunch of Western directors, John Ford, and then the spaghetti Westerns with Clint Eastwood, who's, all those Good, Bad, and the Ugly and all that stuff. I've almost watched a movie every night. There was a few nights where I was tired and I just went to bed, but I pretty much have watched a movie every night for the last 15 months. So I just went, because I'm not big on the watching whole series. I can't spend like 40 hours or even more than that. Some of those series are like 100 hours that you've got to spend with them. And that's just too much of a commitment with me. I like a one night, I watch the movie. If I'm tired, then I'll watch all the special features the next night. But I usually watch the movie and then watch all the special features all in one night and end up staying up way too late. And then my kids wake me up early.
Sure.
But that was kind of my routine over the pandemic, and just dove down the rabbit hole on a bunch of directors that I had always wanted to check out and didn't really have time. And that's been my thing. I feel like I have like a minor now in like film studies.
Yeah, man. Well, there are worse things to have. An unofficial education. We shouldn't even call it unofficial education. I was about to be like, oh, it's because it's not at a college level, but it's like, hey, man, education comes from everywhere. Here's a question for you. How do you find that accessing and spending so much time in another medium of art has influenced, if at all, your playing and the inspiration behind different sounds, emotions, scenes that you want to communicate through your horn, or not horn, but through your instrument?
Yeah, definitely some of that. Yeah, and just being inspired by it, stuff like 2001 and David Lynch movies are very inspiring because they're so mysterious, but also the technical, when you're watching how they make everything, that aspect of it I found it very like a parallel to music stuff, how they put everything together and all the technical aspects of filmmaking, the score and the editing and the cinematography and all that stuff. I just kind of like looking under the microscope at it, even though I don't really know anything about it like I do about music, but I know that there's a whole like world there to learn, so I was kind of, dipping my toe in the water and just, even though I don't understand a lot of it, like somebody that didn't know anything about music probably wouldn't understand all the technical stuff that people are talking about when they talk about, theory and stuff like that. I didn't understand all the technical, jargon and stuff like that, but it was still just fascinating to me to watch how they put everything together and watch the directors talk about their process and how they go about it, each aspect. There's just so much. It's really just like the ultimate art form, really, because there's so much that goes into it. There's the cinematography, the sound, the music score.
Another thing people don't think about is choreography, right? Every scene is choreographed and is staged to a certain extent.
Making their mark and where they're going to be and the blocking of the shots. And then, after they shoot a scene, they do all the pickup shots so they can cut to different stuff and have, all that kind of stuff covered. Coverage is what they call it, I think, in case they need to cut away and save, a take or whatever, they can cut to some other kind of shot. And
sure.
Anyway, it's fascinating. I wouldn't claim to know anything about it to somebody that did that, for a living or whatever, but it's still fascinating to me.
Very cool. Well, man, I wanted to talk to you about a few specific things that, like, immediately whenever I thought about you, I thought, oh, these are topics I really want to hit with Tommy. Is, you've been present on the scene here in Austin for a long time, like a really long time. And I mean, I kind of view you as this bridge between the old guard, which I say absolutely affectionately and endearingly, and the young cats that are either just coming on or have been coming on, just recently in the past 5-10 years. But you've been on the scene long enough to kind of witness firsthand a lot of the kind of formidable forces that have made up the Austin jazz community. People like, Tony Campise. And in another project, we talked about, how you would leave Eddie V's every Monday night, like playing with Chris Kimura's quartet, and then you guys would go over to the jam. And so how have you kind of seen the legacy of those pillars influence the scene in a lasting way? And what has it kind of been like to see very distinct, definitive chapters of the Austin scene grow?
Oh, it's been great. Yeah. And it kind of feels like the generations, there's like that older generations, some of which are still around, John Blondell. Like, I think of it as when everybody moved to Austin. So there's like the dudes that moved to Austin in the 70s, which were like John Blondell, Mike Mordecai, Tony Campise, although I think he might have came in the early 80s. But yeah, there's those guys. Then there's the guys that came in the 80s, like John Fremgen and Jeff Helmer, a little bit younger than those cats. Then there's the 90s generation, where that's kind of me, even though I didn't technically move here till 2005. But I was kind of lurking on the scene, since the late 90s. I was living in San Marcos and playing some gigs here, and then just keeps it's kind of like a generational thing. But yeah, it's beautiful to see all the legacy, the Austin jazz legacy, down the line of the years, and how everybody, relates to each other and grows. And, we're losing some of those older guys. We just lost Scott Lanningham, who was really, I would have put him more in the John Fremgen, generation, the 80s generation, than the 70s generation. He left us a little too early, but yeah, I'm just happy to be a part of it, really. And I, like you said, you see me as kind of a bridge between the two, and I try to be as even though it's great to see the generations, for what they are, and each generation of musicians in town, but I try to, mix and mingle with all of them. I like the young guys. I like playing with the older guys. I'm fortunate enough to have gotten to play with a lot of the older guys, especially the ones that aren't here anymore, like Tony and Scott, for sure. But yeah, I love playing with the younger guys too, Pass it on is my thing. And my musicians that I always looked up to do that. Andre Hayward does that. The great Roy Hargrove did that. They were always passing on the knowledge, and Miles, always had the younger generations in his bands,
Yeah.
So I try not to be the type of player that just sticks with their generation, even though, you're going to have an affinity for the guys that you came up with. And there's nothing wrong with that, to want to play with your homeboys that you came up with. There's nothing wrong with that. But I like to mix it up, and have, everybody coexisting, because it's such a beautiful thing to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's super evident in one of the groups that you play in, talking about Scott. And I should also say that I want to speak very in a very limited capacity on that, because I did not know Scott personally. And so I just leave the talking to everybody else. But obviously he was one of those formidable forces. And one of the groups that you're talking about that really started to kind of envelop all those different generations is like Church on Monday, right? Because you've got Dr. Polk, and then you have Scott, and then you have you, and you have Elias, and all these people. So I guess coming into that band with Church on Monday, like what was that experience like, where all of these people who you had probably already played with before in different capacities in different groups, feeling the cohesion, which then led to kind of this lasting legacy of everybody knows, every Monday, Continental, Church on Monday. How did that feel as the group started to grow together?
It felt great for me, and I was kind of the newbie. I wasn't the original guitar player. Jake Langley was. Mm-hmm. So he got, the gig in Las Vegas and started flying out to do the Cirque du Soleil gig.
Oh, cool.
And so that was when Elias started calling me to sub for him. He was flying out to do it. And then it finally got to the point where it was like, yeah, Jake's going to move to Las Vegas because he's getting the Cirque du Soleil gig. And so I became the new member. I don't even remember like how long ago that was. Probably about 6 or 7 years ago, like 2014, maybe 2015.
But that was pretty short after the inception of the group, right? Because I think the first initial Church on Monday record, if I'm not mistaken, came out in 12.
Yeah, or 11 or 12. Yeah, they had been doing it for 2 or 3 years. So yeah, I joined fairly early on, and it was very intimidating. Number one, because Jake Langley is an amazing guitar player. I don't know if you've checked him out at all.
Only through the record.
He's world-class level. Mm-hmm. He's played with Joey DeFrancesco. He's lived in New York. He's like real deal kind of player. And I could kind of sense, from the other guys in the band, the loss of him. I could just kind of tell that they weren't, they were going to miss his playing for sure. They were open to me, and being nice and everything, but I could still sense the loss of him, and there was a guy that bootlegged all their shows that was at all the gigs, and he had them all for me to check out. So I was checking them out to learn the repertoire mostly, but I'm sitting there hearing all of Jake Langley's solos on every tune and just going like, man, how am I going to compete with this? Well, and I basically just had to just say, he's him and I'm me. I'm never going to beat him, because I was, there was a moment where it was like, okay, maybe I could transcribe a bunch of his solos and just try to sound exactly like him as much as possible. And it was like, that's ultimately not going to work, So I just had to, say he's him and I'm me, just do your thing. And it is what it is, And I remember Elias asked me when I first joined the band if I would sit down, because Jake Langley sat down. And Elias was like, would you have a problem sitting down? And I don't like playing sitting down. I like to stand. I used to sit down a lot, but it started causing me back problems. And, the tall, lanky guys I just do better standing up. I feel like I play better. I have more energy. I can kind of dance around. So I was like, hey, I really don't, and he was totally cool with it. He just was like asking me if I could do that. And when I told him I really don't feel comfortable sitting down when I play, he was like, oh, no problem. That's fine. Yeah. But it was, it was a moment for me, probably way more than it was a moment for him, because I was like, I could have like acquiesced and said, yeah, I'll sit down because that's what Jake Langley did. And, I'm trying to just fit in exactly like he did. But I was like, I know I'll play better if I stand up. I know that that's me, it's more my thing to stand up. And so I just had to, and it was a moment for me to just, kind of stand on my own 2 feet and
quite literally
just do my thing. And then, the other aspect, that was part one of being intimidated, was that I was filling in for Jake Langley. And part two of being intimidated was playing with all these great guys that are pillars of the scene, of each generation, Dr. Polk on down, and Elias was a big influence on me coming up too. I would go see him play, when he used to have a thing at Cedar Street, and he was, the up and coming guy in the 90s that everybody was checking out in Austin. So yeah, it was intimidating for sure to get on stage with those guys. And Scott, like I said, at the memorial service that we did at Continental Club a couple weeks ago, he could probably say, he was such a beautiful cat and such a great guy that he could probably sense my apprehension, at the gigs when I first started playing with them. And he always made it a point to like pull me to the side after the gig and say, you sound great, and I love playing with you, and you fit right into this band, just do your thing, and all that kind of stuff, which really meant a lot to me, more than he probably knew, because he just was the type of guy that does that for anybody. But doing that for me really helped me, stick to my guns, so to speak, as far as just doing my own thing, and, just being in my mind, just being like, Elias hired me to do my thing. I might not be Jake Langley. I'm never going to be Jake Langley, but, that's all right. I'm just going to do my thing, and we'll see what happens. He'll either keep me on the gig or he won't, you know?
Right. Yeah. Man, that's so beautiful. And thank you for sharing that, kind of intimate moment that Scott would have with you. Sounds like it was very, very often, like you said, every single gig. And, I think another thing that we might not give ourselves the grace to ourselves initially, but I mean, you think back about all the differences of, you talked about Miles Davis kind of doing this and like having the difference between the first and second great quintet, and those were not exactly the same. So like the same thing is true of the way that we think about adding different players in. If we all want them to follow a very specific kind of, we can give pointers of the kind of music that we want to create, but if we want it to be to a T exactly how we want, then all of those charts better be charted out, with very specific parts, and say, don't deviate from this. But I think that's really beautiful of this kind of evolution of the group and going forward. And like you said, if he didn't like it, then you wouldn't have kept the gig, but obviously you did. It's been 7 years now, and it's made the return. And you guys are back, right? At the gallery.
We just did the second one. The first one was supposed to be the night that we did for Scott, but we did that instead of, we did that downstairs at the big club instead of doing it upstairs. So last week was technically the first night that we were back upstairs, and then last night was the second one.
Yeah.
And we're back on. Crowds there. So it's one of the most amazing listening audiences I've ever experienced in Austin.
Mm.
And that's all, I give all that credit to Elias, because he's just cultivated a great listening audience. I mean, it certainly helps that Dr. Polk is there,
Mm-hmm.
but Elias has a following for sure, like Ephraim does. You know, just anytime
Right.
he plays, there's going to be people that show up to hear him because he's such an Austin icon.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, he's just developed the best listening audience, you know, and we all have as a band. You know, I'll give the band credit.
Mm.
But it's, you know, it's his effort that has developed it, and it's such an incredible audience. There's a handful of hardcore fans that are pretty much there every week. There's about 10. Yeah, there's about 10 people, 8 to 10 people that are there every week, and then it just fans out from there, you know. So it's never like a dull audience ever. It's such a great listening audience.
That is a treasured gig right there. It
is, man.
It's like once you find it,
it's basically the best gig I've ever, as far as regular gigs. You know, it's a regular house gig. It's the best gig I've ever been a part of, for sure.
That's amazing.
I've grown so much as a musician in the last 6 years doing that gig, just playing with those guys, and just, you need those. You know, I make my living playing gigs where people aren't really listening. I mean, you get the occasional listener, and you know, and I try to zero in on that. If I see somebody paying attention, you know, at my regular restaurant gigs or whatever gigs I'm doing, if I see somebody actually listening, and they listen, you know, there's people that listen, and you just have to connect with that person or table or whatever and just say, all right, I'm playing for you.
Yeah.
But, you know, most of my gigs, I'm just, you know, paying the bills. I'm still having, you know, I'm still having the time of my life doing what I love to do, but that's just the nature of a working musician in Austin, Texas. You know, if you want to make a living, you're going to be playing a lot of society gigs and stuff like that. And I'm totally cool with that. There's nothing else I would rather be doing. But to have that weekly gig where it's an engaged audience and you're playing, you know, because when the audience is engaged, it brings your playing up so many levels. You know, it's amazing how that works. But when you know that people are listening to you, you just, you know, your game just jumps up 3 notches or whatever. Yeah. So just to have that every Monday, and, you know, there's so many weeks where that gig just pushes me through to the next Monday, you know, because I'll have that gig, and then the whole rest of the week is just gigs where I'm just doing my thing, and maybe some people will be listening, but maybe they won't.
Yeah, right.
And, you know, it is what it is. You know, I don't take anything for granted. I'm happy to have those gigs because that's what I, you know, do for a living. So, but, you know, there's a lot of weeks where it's like, you know, you feel the work aspect of it. You know, you're working, you know, it's not always all fun and games. It is, you know, if you look at it from the point of view, if you're playing music, but, you know, there's a lot of nights where it feels like work, in all honesty, because, you know, you're not getting any kind of feedback from an audience. You're just up there doing your thing, and it's kind of a one-sided thing. And some of those nights are hard, you know, it's not always easy.
It's like a relationship, you know, like anything else. It's community. Because I know exactly what you're talking about. You know, we held, before the pandemic shut everything down, I mean, we held that Friday night gig at Ruth's Chris with my trio for 3.5 years. And, you know, you could tell some nights you were like, yep, this is, you know, the best indication of whenever it was like, yeah, we're wallpaper right now. We're playing to the bar stools, was whenever, you know, we would use this wine bucket as the tip jar that we'd put right there, and we'd be right by the entrance, and we put it right there. And Roots Chris also had this thing where, like, by their two little, lounge chairs for people waiting for a table, there was a side table and a big bowl of mints. And, people would eat the mints, and then, right before they go to their table, they'd go over to the tip jar and they'd throw in the wrapper, because they thought it was a trash can instead of a tip jar, and then conversely, you had the people who would take their pocket change and then drop it in one by one. And of course it's a metal, tin. So ding, 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 as you're, so anyways, like, but those are, and I laugh and I smile about those things, because even though at the time, especially when we're in the routine of doing 5, 6, 7, 8 gigs in a week, whatever, we see those things and it can really get to us. But then, now when things are not quite as plentiful, you're like, oh man, like, I long for the time that I can get mad about that again, but not like mad, but just like kind of experience those different things. Cause it's all part, like you said, it's all part of being a working musician, is that you're going to have those that really feel like it's like two people in a relationship coming together to really focus on one another. And you're going to have those times where it feels terribly one-sided. But I think there's beauty in all of that. And also, one of the things that, as you were saying, describing this gig of, there's a following, people are energized, they're paying attention. You feel like everything, you just kind of everything turns on, kind of becomes electric, for lack of a better word. It just kind of reminded me and made me thankful, even thinking about what we have now, where that is a coveted gig that not a lot of people get to have, especially on a regular type thing. But it made me thankful for what we have in Monks now, which Monks is dedicated. It's like that experience concentrated, several times a week, where everybody's just there totally to absorb the music. And, anyways, this is kind of just like a non sequitur or a tangent, but just as you were saying that, it made me thankful for where the scene is, despite everything with the pandemic, and that we're kind of seeing this resurgence in very dedicated, unique kind of listening and communal musical experiences.
Yeah. God bless Colin Shook and Monks.
Yeah.
Because he's really, it's ultimately, he did it kind of just to kind of help through the pandemic kind of thing. But what I think it's really done ultimately is elevated the scene, like you're saying, because there wasn't before Monk, he had Monks going before the pandemic, and that was starting to do things, and he had the listening audience going, but he wasn't doing it quite as regularly as he is now. I think he was only doing it a few times a month as opposed to a few times a week. So it just kind of kicked it into overdrive. The pandemic, I guess, is what happened. But now it's like, we have this listening, outlet for listening audiences for jazz in Austin, which, there really wasn't that. Yeah, that Church on Monday gig was like the rare bird before
Sure.
Colin started the Monks thing. I mean, every once in a while you can luck up at the Elephant Room and have a listening audience, in the first few tables, but it's not set up for that. Like before Monks and before Church on Monday, the only example of it I knew in Texas was Cezanne in Houston, which I think is kind of what Colin, that was part of his kind of model, that, he played there a few times and he wanted to try to create that kind of vibe in Austin, because there really wasn't that. So there was that club in San Antonio, Carmen's. Do you know about Carmen's?
Sure. Yeah. By reputation.
Yeah.
Only.
And it was kind of like that. Jerry Gibbs had started that club when he was living in San Antonio, and it was set up, as a listening kind of vibe, but it was a bar too, and they served food and but he would bring in like world-class artists to play with him, like Dewey Redman and Mike Stern, and So he had it set up pretty nice for a listening environment and a listening audience. But I think from what I heard, I never played at Cezanne, but from what I heard and, what I saw on videos on YouTube and stuff like that, that was like the listening audience club. And pretty much as far as Texas is concerned. I don't really know about Dallas. There might be something going on like that in Dallas, but I don't really know. But Austin needed it, for sure. So Colin just, he's like, we were calling him at the last time I was at Dufour's Jam. Everybody was saying he's the king of Austin jazz. Now he's been crowned, and that's a pretty young age to be crowned the king. But I mean, I honestly think he's single-handedly, I mean, I wouldn't say save the scene because, even though that's everybody's saying that, and I've said that too on Facebook posts and stuff. I don't know if saved the scene is the right word or term, but he's definitely lifted it to a whole new level and made it much more like a recognized thing, and there's an listening audience for that now. Like when I play those shows, there's like people there that are there to listen. It's amazing because Church on Monday was the only gig, as far as a regular thing. Every once in a while you'll have them pop up where you just get lucky and you have that kind of audience. But as far as a regular thing, it's known for that. Like Elias doesn't do what Colin does as far as saying, put your cell phones on silent. And if you need to talk, he doesn't do like that New York, he doesn't announce it like that, but it's kind of just known at Church on Monday. And I've seen like the regulars at Church on Monday, like shush people that like just people that are coming in off the street. And they don't really know what the deal is because it's like, they're serious. Yeah. And it's, it's an older audience, dedicated, jazz listening audience. But yeah, I've seen them like, reprimanding people for talking too loud.
That's the ticket, man. Whenever it's not the venue, it's not the band, it's the audience that is demanding the respect that the band deserves. That is like goals.
So shout out to those hardcore jazz fans in Austin, because there's a lot of them, that do that. They do it at the Elephant Room too, which is always awesome. Like people like Clay, or he goes and tells people like, can you guys be quiet, we're trying to listen. That's because they're the only people that can really do it, and not suffer any consequences. Like you said, if one of the band guys, I've seen band guys try to do it, that never goes over well. Of course the staff's not going to do it because
they're trying to make their number.
They're trying to make their number. They're not going to put their job at risk, just to have the band have a more enjoyable experience.
Yeah, sure.
So shout out to the audience members, the Austin jazz fans that do that, because that's our saving grace at a lot of gigs.
Well, it's definitely that balance of audience members. And, for a quick little segue, speaking of balancing, like balancing, we talked about this a little bit, about how having kids, affected practice routines during the pandemic when everything shut down. But I'm really interested on your viewpoint on balancing a family, and having that family continue to expand, because, being a single individual, like, and I am not, but like being a single individual is like a whole nother thing. It's a whole nother regiment, like you were saying, of like how we want to live our lives and how we dedicate to the craft and all these different things. But then you have, a significant other, or then a wife, right? And that changes things entirely. And then obviously the big catalyst there of like the major shift is whenever you have a child. And then I have to assume, even though after the first child, and I'm not sure exactly how many children you have, but then like having additional children, like the second child, I have to assume is also quite a bit of a curveball, because then you're balancing two different kids at different age levels, even if it's just a year. I mean, during the first 5-6 years of life, that is pretty pivotal time where it's very different every single year. So how have you balanced being a full-time gigging musician, especially whenever our schedule is kind of the inverse of what, is conventional work hours of like 9 to 5. We have the inverse of that. How have you adapted to that with your family expanding?
It's been a challenge for sure. Before the pandemic, I was the sole breadwinner for about 6 years. Ever since we started having kids, we decided, we didn't really know what we were going to do before we had kids. A lot of musicians, male musicians, I should say, do the Mr. Mom thing, where the wife works, the dad stays home and takes care of the kids, and then he goes out at night and plays gigs. That's usually how it goes with most of the male musicians that I know that have kids.
Sure.
So that was kind of on the table of how we were going to do it. But my wife really wanted to be home with them, during the first few years. So, and I had already been substitute teaching a little bit just as a side extra money kind of thing whenever I needed. I got hired as a substitute teacher, I don't know, in 2011, 2012 is when I got the job. And I wasn't really doing it a whole lot. Just whenever I had, a slow week or slow whatever, then I would go do it for some extra cash. It was basically just a backup safety net kind of thing.
Sure.
And, but anyway, we had my son in 2013. And I was like, well, she wants to stay home. We had many conversations about it. She wants to stay home, and I could probably make it work if I sub during the day.
Yeah.
And play at night. So that's what I ended up doing for years. I was doing that all the way up until the pandemic. And of course I would have the summers off, so I was only doing it when school was in, but there's no subbing during the summer, of course.
Sure.
But I ended up subbing, unless I had a real late gig. And I don't really play at the Elephant a whole lot anymore. I used to play there a lot more in the earlier 2000s, 2005 to 2015. I played at the Elephant a lot more than I do now. So I really don't, most of my gigs were over by 11, 10, 11, maybe 12. So that's early enough that I could get up and sub. So I pretty much subbed every day. I was pretty much subbing full time, unless I had a gig during the day, which I usually didn't, or I was tired from the night before, or, I had a recording session or something like that. Then I would take the day off. But 9 times out of 10, I didn't have something like that, because all my gigs were in the evening to those hours. So I was basically subbing full time and working almost every night. So it ended up being like, 60, 70 hour weeks.
Yeah. And then you got to come home and be dad,
Yeah.
So,
and my wife, it kind of got put on my wife to do a lot of that. I did what I could, but I mainly just wanted, when I was home, I mainly just wanted to like play with them and spend time with them, so the roles have kind of developed, although they kind of flip-flopped during the pandemic. And I've been at home with them, which was great, because it was getting to the end of the whole idea was that we were going to do this as long as we could. And by the time they got to school age, then we would reconfigure and reassess what we were going to do. She was probably going to go back to work, and then my son did 1 year of school last year. He did kindergarten, and then the pandemic hit, so everything just went upside down. And now I'm at home 24 hours a day. The sub The sub job is gone. The gigs are gone. Everything's gone. But it was really a blessing in the end. Of course, the beginning of the pandemic was terrifying because we didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
What was going to happen with music. It's like, is gigging done? I guess it's done. So that was kind of terrifying to face that reality. But in hindsight, now that it's been over a year, it was a blessing because I got to spend all kinds of time with my kids where I was really feeling like I was missing out on stuff. I mean, during the summers when I wasn't substituting during the day, we would go do stuff every day and spend a lot of time and try to soak up as much family time as we could because we knew that I was going to be back to working and subbing and playing and all that in the fall. But it was starting to wear on me for sure. And my daughter was getting to the age where she was starting to say, I don't want you to go, play tonight. And it's like, well, I have to go play, I got to make money. And she would be staring in the window as I'm walking out the door, all sad puppy dog eyes. So it was just getting to the point where it was like, okay, we got to figure out something else. Yeah. And then the pandemic hit and everything flipped. So it was ultimately a blessing because I've got to spend the last year with my kids and it's been beautiful.
Yeah. Well, and that's really great too, that, such open and clear communication and being able to be flexible too. And like kind of have these like milestone little plans, just between you and your wife of like, okay, whenever the kids get to this age, like this stage of life, we'll reassess and stuff like that. And I think that having the proactive mindset of how you're going to balance, career and parenthood. I feel like that's something that it seems easy to do, like in theory or whatever. But, whenever I have to assume that whenever you have kids, everything just moves so fast and just everything's, maybe not always stressful, but it's just fast and it's like things are happening and you're just trying to keep up as you go along. But again, just part of that journey of being flexible.
Yeah. You end up just kind of operating on instinct on a lot of levels. You put the plan in place and then you just go.
Right.
Like the kids don't give you any time to really think. You just have to just go. There's diapers to be changed, kids are crying and they need to be fed and they need to take a shower. You need to give them a shower and they got to get up and go to the doctor at this time and he's got to go here. And it's like, you're just going, you don't have time to think, that's why I needed those movies at night to just
unwind,
decompress and be like, oh yeah, what do we got for tomorrow?
For sure. Well, man, I want to ask you before too long about Storybook. And, I feel like, there's two kind of situations, and it's not a binary, but like in my mind, there's two things that come to mind. It's like, okay, people are really young and they go, all right, I'm just going to start pumping out records because it's kind of a prerequisite of being on the scene now, right? Where it's like, okay, content. And, and so you have people who either, make a bunch of records and then, figure out what they want to say as they go along and they learn from the mistakes of previous records or EPs or singles or whatever they're putting out. And then you have people who refrain from just jumping in and they go, no, I'm going to focus more on like, again, not to say that the first, hypothetical that I proposed is any sort of like immaturity or anything to just go throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. But then you have other people who go, no, I'm going to hone in my craft. I'm going to find what it is, what my voice is, what I want to say musically and all these different things. And then they put stuff out later. And I'm not assuming that that's kind of the mindset that you had, but, I did love on your website where it said, this record is the culmination of playing jazz music for the last 25 or so years. So what is it that, after 25 or so years of playing jazz, like what was it that you felt compelled to say or present that made you want to make that record? that still hadn't been recorded up until that point?
Yeah, it just felt like it was time. My 20s, even though I was, playing gigs and working some as a jazz musician, I was still doing, my friend and I, Gene Centeno, who I've been buddies with since high school. When I graduated from college, our goal was to do a live hip hop band.
Yeah.
That was always our dream thing that we were planning on doing. And so when I got out of college, we were like, let's do this. So I spent, a good chunk of my 20s pursuing that and writing music for that project. And we were pursuing that, for years. Then I got into my 30s and wanted to get back into the jazz thing, as far as like, writing and where I'm going to put my creative energy. I put energy towards jazz, when I was in school, and then, I still played gigs on the side, but as far as my creative energy and writing and stuff was all going towards the hip hop project in my 20s. And then I got into my 30s and started looking, feeling like it was time for me to start looking towards a jazz record and composing for that and stuff. And, it took, 10 years of I don't want to say preparation, but
sure,
because it didn't really come into focus until my late 30s. For the up until then, it was like just writing tunes. I never even, like you said, I think it's more of a generational thing. But it was also the fact that I was gigging and I was, it wasn't like I was that was on a high list for me to get a record done. It was more just composing is what I wanted to work on. So composing was part of I just felt like my composing needed to be, shedded just like everything else does, So I made it a part of my practice routine was composing. I read this Bill Frisell article about his compositional process and how he does it. And so I was like, I'm going to follow that kind of routine, make it a part of my practice routine. I just want the initial thing was I just wanted to get better as a composer. I felt like as a composer, I wasn't ready to have a record of all original compositions. That was just how I felt. I was a late bloomer too, as far as, I wasn't like, I was playing gigs and stuff like that in my 20s, but I wasn't like a top call guy straight out of the box, like a lot of guys are. It took me a lot of years of shedding and, going to jam sessions and all that to finally get to where I felt like I was on people's, radar as somebody call. It took me a long time, a lot longer than it took other people. But I was, patient with the process, and I made the composing thing, part of my practice regimen and part of my priorities that I wanted to prove on, really just wanting to improve on that, not necessarily, of course I had a record in the back of my mind, that I wanted to get done at some point, but it wasn't like, that wasn't the pressing like goal. The pressing goal was just get better as a composer and try to get a batch of tunes together that I felt were worthy of recording. That was the first goal, and it was like, until I reach that goal, then I've got no business of trying to put a record out. I wanted to have a record of, compositions that I felt were all worthy of being on the record. And that took about 5 years, it took a long time. It took a long time for me to get a batch of tunes that I felt, lived up to it. A lot of trial and error kind of stuff,
That's really fantastic. I mean, that's something that I think not a lot of people think about. They don't think about it in those terms. They just go, okay, I should probably put out a record and let's just put together a bunch of tunes. Like, hopefully I can write a bunch of tunes. Like, it's having the desire to put out a record before you have the desire to write the tunes.
Yeah.
And it's not always the case, with that, but I have been guilty of that at times. And so to hear that you were like, no, it's about the music. It feels like it's serving the music first, as opposed to, and this might sound negative whenever I say this, as opposed to a kind of performative action that is, okay, I need to get out a record because it's the thing to do, rather than saying, no, I'm making this record because it's been burdened on me to make it by the tunes that I've composed that I really believe in, that I want to be heard by people, whether or not they like it, that's their to decide, but yeah, that's a really, really, I mean, just kind of the epitome of a mature way to think about it.
Yeah. And I think, like you were saying, I think that's just the climate now. The climate changed, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. That wasn't, the climate wasn't that you can make it from your bedroom, you can do it. You can become, a famous musician from your bedroom if you put your mind to it nowadays. That's just a possibility. That still wasn't really a possibility at that time, at least not for me, because I had come up in the older way of thinking that, you compose the record first, then you start worrying about putting out the record once you've got it completed.
Yeah.
Nowadays, the climate is that, just get the record out. You need content, which I have a hard time. I feel like an old man now in that aspect, because I have a hard time with that type of mentality. But, I do what I can to try to stay current. I have enough tunes for a new record. I just need to get it recorded.
Yeah. But, there's something you put on your website that I wanted to ask you about, and the direct quote is, "At a time when technology and social media attention are enabling musicians to continually record and release content, Howard's old world approach combines patience, humility, and dedication to his craft." And so my question there was, how do you feel that instant gratification for the virtual audience, or the audience, virtual audience, whatever we want to call it, has contributed or detracted from the art form of making, or even more specifically, digesting records?
Yeah, it's, and me and my old friends from my generation, we have bitch sessions about it, and how the climate is now, but it is what it is. You either deal with it or you get out of the business kind of thing. But yeah, I feel like there's still brilliant content out there. You just
Sure.
have to sift through, and you've kind of always had to sift through a lot of not as good content to get to the good stuff. It was just more, back in my day, it was more word of mouth kind of thing. Your friends would tell you about the good stuff to go check out. And then when I got into jazz, the older jazz musicians would tell you the records to go check out, and these are the ones that you need to be listening to. And it's still there. I think there's never going to not be brilliant musicians. There's always going to be brilliant musicians from every generation. So I don't buy into the old man, this younger generation can't, they can't do anything. That's, every generation says that about the younger generation. It's just the format has changed, and do I necessarily think that the format is good for the art form? I'm divided on it, because it just pushes for content at all times. Everybody just has to flood the market with content. And it's not always necessarily great content,
Yeah,
But
right.
think about it, think about the 50s and And like those labels like Prestige and Riverside, they were, you know, because jazz musicians can just walk into a studio and make a record in one day. You know, they can just record tunes. It doesn't necessarily have to be composed original tunes. They can just show up and make a record. So the record labels back then were flooding the market with all those jazz records. Of course, you know, a lot of them were fantastic records because the musicians were fantastic. So the content was still very high level, but they were nevertheless flooding the market because it's so easy to make a jazz record. You just go into the studio and hit record, you know?
Yeah.
So it's, you know, it's half, you know, whatever they say, a dozen of one thing, you know, whatever. It's like, it's good and bad, and it's always going to be evolving. So you just have to deal with it, or like I said, move on to something else. I don't deal with it as well as seems like the younger generations do, but I've kind of found my niche as a working musician, which was, you know, kind of sketchy there with the pandemic. It was like, am I going to be able to be a working musician? And you know, I spent the entire pandemic like debating on whether I should get set up to record remotely at home. And I was like, it's not really my thing. You know, the whole reason I play music is to play live with other people and an audience. And so I was fighting it. And people kept asking me, can you record? You know, I want to put you on a track. And so I finally, just within the last few months, Scott Lanningham really helped me. I had several friends that really helped me get set up to do it, because I know nothing about that, you know. It was, and I didn't want to learn about it. You know, I'm kind of an old man already like that, about that kind of stuff. I was like, it's not really what I want to do. You know, I could do it, I guess, but it's not really how I want to make my living.
Sure. Yeah.
But my friends were just hounding me. It's not, you know, they were like, it's not that big a deal. Just get set up and just do it. Scott Lanningham included. You know, he asked me to be on a track of stuff that he was working on before he passed. And he was like, can you record from home? And I was like, well, I'm thinking about getting set up to do it, but I haven't yet. All my friends are hounding me to do it. And so he was like, just do it, man. And he's like, I'll wait for you to get set up, you know, just go ahead and get it set up. So I finally got set up to do that just within the last few months. Yeah. And I've made a little bit of money, you know, with people asking me to put guitar on their tracks. But it's not, to me as a jazz musician, it's like, that's what, you know, what we do is play live, you know, and play in front of people. And to me, the whole beauty of playing music is playing with other people, you know, and making a sound together. You know, playing by yourself it's okay. You know, I work on solo guitar stuff, but it's definitely not my favorite thing to do. You know, I'd much rather be playing with people. Yeah.
Not as gratifying for sure. But, you know, I almost think, you know, the whole thing that I was thinking about when you were talking about, you know, your friends hounding you to do that and different things. And you were like, oh, well, I don't want to become this person. I don't want to have to acclimate to this and do this full time now and change the identity of myself, of how I think about these things. You know, it brought me back almost to the way that you and your wife were approaching, you know, parenthood, is that, you know, you find a system that works, you find things that work for the time that you're in. And then once you hit another milestone, or you hit, you know, a different kind of environment shift, then you go, okay, now we're going to be flexible. Now we'll go to what we need to do. So it kind of sounds like a similar thing of, gigs were nowhere. Everything was cold stop and, you know, slowly trickled in the fall. But even then, you know, things weren't safe. And so we had to take calculated risks or not take any risks at all. And so it's kind of this thing of where, you know, it becomes a necessary evil, if only for a few months or however long, half a year, whatever it is, before we can get back to doing the other thing. But that flexibility is something that I think we're all we all had to figure out, especially whenever it was skills that we did not already have. And we see people who are putting out full, like people like Brian Carter, who he's got, 4 of himself that he's put edited together, all sitting on the couch. And I'm like, and I'm sure there's probably a, fairly simple explanation, editing wise, how he was able to put all these versions of himself, and then he's recorded all of it. And he puts that out, the first month of quarantine. And you're like, oh man, like I just feel so behind. This is so like, I just don't even want to get involved in that. But there is, some beauty in learning some new skills, but it doesn't make the growing pains any more preferable.
Yeah. Shout out to everybody that can adapt that quickly. I don't know. I guess I'm old already in that aspect, or in that respect, because I'm fighting it tooth and nail.
Yeah, for sure.
And hoping that I can just ride into the sunset as a working musician that just plays gigs, because that's all I want to do. If I want to do, like, to me, it's the whole, like, if you're passionate about that, then great. But that's not, like we were saying with the family, your time gets very finite.
Yeah.
Especially your free time, So yeah, those of you that are young and don't have families yet, take advantage of all the free time you have, because it goes away. I have about 2 hours at the end of the day, if I'm not exhausted, that I have actual free time to myself.
To watch all the Westerns and spaghetti Westerns and Criterion collections.
Do what I want to do, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so I really have to pick and choose what I'm going to do with the time that I have. And I wake up every day, and the only thing that I have on my mind is to become a better musician and a better guitar player. That's the only goal. I do the hip hop thing just for fun on the side. I'm not pursuing that anymore as something that I want, that I'm striving towards goals with or anything like that. That's just for absolute pleasure that I do that. But I still have that same burning desire that I had when I was a kid, when I first started playing guitar, to just be better, That it's like I was thinking about it the other day, I'm always like turning the corner on something, and I never get around the corner. It's always like you're driving in a circle. Ultimately, you're always driving around the corner, but I always just have that feeling, it's like I'm almost going to be able to do this, or I'm almost going to be able to play, a good solo on this tune, or I'm almost going to be able to, play in 7/4 or 7/8. It's just, there's always some goal that's like, I feel like I'm right around the corner if I just keep shedding and keep, playing. And that desire just doesn't go away for me. Yeah. And that, and that's the one thing that I want to do. I don't hardly ever wake up with, desires and goals to be better at software and, editing stuff. I'll do it. Since I got set up to record, I've been messing around with iMovie, and it's fun. I have fun with it for, a little while. Yeah. But then I quickly lose interest and resort back to, I should be shedding. When you have kids, it's like every free moment is like, I should be shedding right now.
Prioritizing. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So it's like, that's all I have time for, really. It's like, maybe when my kids get older and I have more free time, I'll be able to delve into some other areas and stuff like that. And it is interesting. The recording stuff is interesting. I can see where people get, sucked down the rabbit hole with that stuff, because it's interesting. Yeah, it is. And the more you learn, the more you want to know. But my burning desire continues to be, when I wake up in the morning, is just music. I want to be better at music, all aspects, composing, performing, you know, all that. I just want to be a better musician
Mm.
and be able to, you know, express myself with as little, you know, boundaries, you know,
Yeah.
as possible. And the only way you can do that is to get better at your
Yeah.
instrument, you know, and have less limitations.
Absolutely. Man, beautiful. Beautiful sentiments from the Tommy Howard, man. This has been so fun. Man, I want to ask you a couple final questions. The first one is if there is a record or two records or three records, you know, if you can't pick one that you would absolutely recommend everybody go listen to as soon as they finish this episode, what would it be and why?
Man, that's going to be tough. I mean, if we want to keep it jazz related, because we could go in any
Sure. Yeah.
direction, but yeah, we'll keep it jazz related. I mean, let's do like a guitar one. I don't know. Even that is going to be hard to narrow down. If there was like
Hit me with a few.
that's definitive for me, like let's say for jazz guitar records, definitely Barney Kessel and the Pole Winners.
Mm.
There's a bunch of those though. The one that my favorite one is the Pole Winners Ride Again, which is their second one.
Okay.
And by Pole Winners, it was Ray Brown, Barney Kessel, and Shelly Manne.
Okay.
They won the reading polls for, you know, Downbeat magazine or whatever it was that year.
Got it. Okay.
And that's where they got the Pole Winners title from. But they did like 5 or 6 records, and they're all incredible. But the second one is just magical for some reason. That one's great. Pole Winners Ride Again. It's the album cover where they're all riding on a merry-go-round.
Okay. Very cool.
That's easy to remember. Yeah.
Yeah. So hard to forget.
Yeah, that one is awesome. That's one of my top guitar records for sure. What else? Just general jazz records. Ahmad Jamal, Live at the Pershing, of course. That's,
yeah.
You know, these are ones that everybody's probably already heard, though. Maybe I should name some like more obscure type ones that maybe people haven't heard. What's another like huge record for me? A lot of Peter Bernstein stuff, especially him as a sideman. There's a Ryan Kaiser record called Battle Cry.
Okay.
That is like a organ trio record with trumpet, which you don't hear that a whole lot.
Yeah.
But it's like Sam Yahel on organ, Brian Blade on drums, Bernstein on guitar, and Ryan Kaiser on trumpet. It's just one of the most swinging records ever. It's incredible. They just play a bunch of standards, but everybody plays really beautifully, and it's a great record.
Very cool.
And there's so many records that I could just talk about for hours.
Well, you'll have to hit me with a curated Spotify or whatever playlist of required listening from Tommy Howard, and I will make sure to put it on the list.
Yeah.
And even put it in the chat or in the description, whatever. And then the final question of the show that I always end with is kind of a I don't know, lighthearted, you know, fun, funny way to end the show is we all have gigs from hell where things just go totally sideways. So if you can think of a particularly funny or just crazy gig from hell over the years of playing in Austin for the past 25 years, what would it be?
Oh, there's so many that come to mind. I don't know if I could just whittle it down to one. Man, just so many elephant room gigs that were hilarious, like hippies dancing to Take 5, you know, and they can't really like find the one, you know.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
But they're still dancing their hearts out, you know. That's always the most hilarious thing in the world to see. What else? Man, I remember like when I was playing with Chris. You know, Chris has his menagerie of horns
Yeah.
that he has around him when he plays. And we were playing this restaurant gig, and, you know, it was towards the end of the night. Everybody was drunk in the restaurant, not
Sure.
us. We weren't drunk.
Bad, yeah.
But everybody was trashed. You know, it was like a Saturday night or something. And this couple, this is in a restaurant, mind you, no dance floor. This drunk couple cleans out the chairs and makes a dance floor and starts swing dancing. And they're absolutely trashed.
Oh my God.
And so like they're dancing it up, and we're, you know, it started out, you know, fine. We were all laughing and it was hilarious because they were so drunk. But they started swinging each other around in circles. And I could see it happening in slow motion. So they're swinging each other around faster and faster and faster. And then the guy just loses her and just throws her right into Chris's horns like this. It was like a strike in bowling. Just every horn just went flying. And I saw it all happen in slow motion. It was terrifying.
Oh my God, it's like a hybrid of laughing and crying because like,
yeah,
oh my.
At the moment it was terrifying. Yeah, because it was like, and I knew it was going to happen. They started spinning around, and I was just like, this is not going to be good, because they were just absolutely trashed. And they just got faster and faster and faster. And then all of a sudden, it was almost like he did it on purpose. He just like lets her go, and she just goes flying, flailing into the air, and just comes down on Chris's horns. Just strike.
Oh, a strike. That's the perfect imagery. Is like it was bowling and just a perfect strike. Oh,
needless
boy.
to say, the gig was over at that point. It was towards the end of the gig anyway, but yeah, we stopped playing and we were like, we're done.
Yeah, and then at that point, it's about time where you ask that person, okay, pull out your checkbook and write your name and leave the $sign blank.
Yeah, which I don't think happened. I think they like skedaddled out of there before anybody knew what happened. Yeah, that was memorable for sure.
Man, that is a gig from hell. That is
it was
primo, Dante's Inferno, seventh ring of hell, straight out of there.
Yeah.
Man, well, Tommy, I can't tell you how thankful I am that you came on the show, man. I know this has been a long time coming. I listening to Storybook, and I even texted you earlier today that I was making lunch and just listening to the record, and I was like, man, this is so meaningful. This is so intentional, and it's so sure of itself, and the band is just so killing, with Brandon and Lit Do, and to spend an extended amount of time talking to you about those influences and your thought process behind making art and making those tunes and everything. It just makes it all the more special. So thank you so much for coming on. And I can't wait to be back on the bandstand with you, hopefully sometime soon.
Cool. Thank you, man. Thank you for having me.
Dude, of course. All right. Have a good night, man. Peace.